It's funny. Usually when we talk about something like a medical diagnosis, there is
Hmm.
this expectation of absolute precision. It feels very mechanical, almost like engineering,
Right. It's very binary. It's undeniably visible.
Exactly. Like you break your arm, the x-ray shows that jagged white line in the bone, and the doctor just points to the screen and says, well, there it is.
Broken or not broken, it's a very clean assessment.
Yeah, and it's comforting to us. I
Yeah.
mean, human beings love when things are visible,
Mhm.
right? When they can be neatly categorized and just addressed with a physical cast or a splint.
Oh, absolutely. We crave that physical proof.
But then uh, you step away from the purely physical body and you venture into the world of human potential. You start looking at the hidden architecture of how we actually construct our reality, and
Hmm.
suddenly that x-ray machine is it's completely useless.
It doesn't translate at all.
No, not even a little. We're looking at this landscape of human effort that is, honestly, it's baffling. I mean, think about your own life right now. I want you to picture a very specific archetype. Let's call them the exhausted striver.
Oh, we all know one of those.
Right. You probably know someone who fits this description perfectly. In fact, you might be occupying this exact role at this exact moment.
It's very common.
You're pouring this vast magnitude of effort into changing a specific circumstance in your life. Maybe you're seeking a greater flow of prosperity, trying to elevate your financial standing from this baseline of scarcity to a state of just sweeping abundance.
Or perhaps trying to sculpt your physical vitality.
Yes, exactly. You're waking up before the dawn. You're pushing your body to its absolute limits, restricting your comforts, just, grinding away.
The output of energy is just monumental. It's staggering.
It is. You're taking an endless tide of physical action. I mean, the sweat is real. The late nights are undeniably real. The sheer volume of energy you're expending is off the charts. Yet when you look at the results, they remain a mere fragment of your true potential.
The needle barely moves, does it?
Rarely.
Yeah.
And it's so frustrating.
It's a profoundly frustrating existence. And, the psychological weight of that experience is really what we need to examine today, because it feels entirely like fighting against an endless ocean current, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah. Like swimming with weights on.
Right. You swim with all your might, your muscles are burning, your lungs are just aching for air. But when you look over to the shore, you haven't moved an inch forward.
Not a single inch.
You're just treading water, expending all your life force merely to keep from drowning.
And the confusion that comes with that exhaustion is entirely justified. I mean, because the pervasive societal belief, the script we've all been handed since our earliest memories, really is that intense physical labor directly equates to vast rewards.
That's the lie we're sold.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're told, just put your head down, outwork everyone else, grind it out. The equation we're taught is completely linear, like an immense input of action produces a corresponding reward.
But if that linear equation were an absolute truth, your immense effort would have already unlocked the reality you so deeply desire. I mean, think about it.
It totally would have.
The exhausted striver would be the architect of a personal utopia by now. The hardest workers in our society would uniformly possess the most abundant realities.
Right. The people working 3 manual labor jobs would be the most prosperous.
Exactly. And yet, basic observation tells us this is clearly not the case.
Which brings up a really uncomfortable contradiction. If the sheer magnitude of physical effort is not producing the desired reality, then the fundamental premise of how we operate within this universe must be flawed.
It has to be. The blueprint we are using is upside down.
Completely upside down.
That is precisely the realization we have to confront. It is not a matter of lacking discipline. I mean, the exhausted striver has discipline in spades.
Oh, they're the most disciplined people on earth.
Right. It is a matter of profound misalignment with the actual mechanics of creation.
I want to pause there for a second because that completely flips the traditional script. And that's really the central mission of our exploration today. We're going to uncover the hidden architecture of reality creation.
It's an entirely new paradigm.
Yeah. We're looking at a paradigm that suggests mere physical action is actually the lowest lever of change available to us. We want to understand how tapping into a supreme inner resonance like the absolute highest frequency of knowing is the only way to effortlessly reorder your external world.
Because if we look at the broader mechanics of existence, reality is not something you push against.
Right.
That is the illusion that exhausts a vast constellation of individuals. Reality is something you tune into.
Tune into. I love that phrasing.
The struggle, that endless swimming against the tide, it arises from fundamentally misunderstanding the sequence of materialization. We operate as though brute force dictates the shape of our lives, completely ignoring the underlying frequency that actually commands the physical realm.
Okay, so if we follow that logic, it forces us to really look at how we instinctively react to obstacles, because our first impulse is almost always physical force.
Almost without fail.
Right. To understand why our frantic physical actions so often fail us, we have to observe our own defaults. We have a natural allegory for this today, and it's a really powerful visual.
It paints the picture perfectly.
Imagine a small winged creature, like a bird or maybe a moth trapped indoors. It is entirely desperate to reach the boundless sky outside.
It just wants to be free.
Exactly. And can see the outside world. The sunshine, the open air, the ultimate destination is right there in plain sight. But it sees all of this through a transparent glass window pane.
Right. An invisible barrier.
So what does it do? It begins to hurl itself against that invisible barrier.
With maximum physical effort.
Maximum physical effort. It strikes the glass continuously. Thud, thud, thud. It's battering itself against a surface it cannot fully comprehend, completely convinced that if it just, applies a little more speed, a little more physical force, it'll break through to the desired reality.
Which is heartbreaking to watch,
It
honestly.
really is. But it never realizes that a complete reversal of perspective, like simply turning completely around, would reveal a vastly open entryway just behind it.
Yeah, when we analyze this behavior, the mapping to human existence is striking. Because we occupy this dense physical realm, our egos become fiercely, almost desperately addicted to physical action.
We just can't help ourselves.
No, because our survival, historically and biologically, has depended on it. When an internal sensation of hunger arises, what do? We physically move our hands to find sustenance.
Right, we hunt, we gather, we cook.
Exactly. When we thirst, we reach out and lift a vessel of water to our lips. We are deeply conditioned by the immediate physical environment.
Right, it's this immediate feedback loop. You perform an action, and you receive an immediate, tangible result.
Precisely. And because of that immediate localized feedback loop, we falsely merge the concept of action directly with the ultimate result.
We fuse them together.
We fuse them together in our minds as the only causal relationship that matters. We think the movement of the hand is the supreme creator of the satisfaction.
Wow.
And this completely blinds us to the higher, far more powerful realms of influence. We become, just like that trapped winged creature, convinced that the physical barrier in our career, our relationships, or our health can only be overcome by more physical force.
We completely ignore the vast, open pathways that exist on different frequencies.
We don't even look for them.
So this brings up a really critical question regarding the fundamental law of cause and effect. I mean, we're taught that our actions are the cause and our circumstances are the effect. But what you're suggesting completely inverts that.
It does. It completely turns it on its head. And it's a radical truth that forces us to question everything we perceive with our physical senses.
Okay, lay it on me.
The truth is this: anything that exists within the physical realm is purely an effect.
Wait, anything physical is an effect.
Let that sit for a moment. By the time a circumstance, an event, or a condition is visible or tangible to your physical senses, it has already materialized. It is entirely finalized. It is the very tail end of a cosmic sequence of creation.
Okay, wait, let me play devil's advocate here on behalf of the listener who might be raising a skeptical eyebrow right now. Because if I'm sitting in a room and I feel an uncomfortable chill, I can walk over to a dial on the wall and physically turn it.
The thermostat, right.
Yeah. The mechanical system engages, and the room becomes warmer. That is absolutely an action changing my physical reality. I am causing a change.
I see where you're going.
So how can you say we shouldn't rely on the physical realm to create change when I can literally feel the heat radiating from the vent because of an action I took?
That is a brilliant challenge, really, and it highlights the exact trap of logic that keeps the exhausted striver running on the treadmill.
Okay, untangle it for me.
Let's look closely at your thermostat example. You are manipulating a very localized, highly contained system that was designed specifically for that mechanical interaction. You are pushing a button that was built to be pushed.
Right, it's a closed loop.
Exactly. But trying to change a broader, encompassing life reality, your absolute prosperity, your enduring vitality, the overarching circumstances of your existence purely through physical struggle, is a completely different magnitude of operation.
I think I need an ELI 5 on that. Explain it like on 5. Why is turning the dial fundamentally different than working longer hours to achieve prosperity?
Think of it this way. Manipulating the localized dial is mechanics. But trying to change the grand trajectory of your life solely through physical effort is like trying to change the macro weather patterns by standing outside in a storm and blowing on the wind.
Oh, wow. Blowing on the wind. That fundamentally shifts the perspective.
You are attempting to alter an effect by manipulating another effect.
Right, because the wind is just a result of other things.
Precisely. The wind is an effect of atmospheric pressure, temperature differentials, and planetary rotation. Your breath is an effect of your lungs expanding and contracting.
So it's two effects just bumping into each other.
Exactly. Blowing on the wind changes nothing of consequence because you are not addressing the root cause of the weather system. When you try to force a grand life reality into existence using only localized physical action, you are experiencing a fundamental misalignment with universal laws.
You're operating at the absolute lowest tier of influence.
The very bottom.
I see. So turning the dial is just a trivial mechanic. But sculpting a life of abundance, or finding a deeply aligned partnership, or achieving a state of profound well-being, those are vast weather systems.
They are massive, complex realities.
And the exhausted striver is out there huffing and puffing, blowing on the wind, wondering why the storm isn't clearing, completely unaware that their breath has no leverage over the atmosphere.
Exactly. You're trying to command the storm from within the rain, using only the tools of the rain. It simply cannot work.
Man, that makes so much sense. But this naturally leads us to a massive pitfall. Because if brute force and endless physical labor are not the answer, if they're the equivalent of the winged creature bashing its head against the glass, many individuals who realize this suddenly swing to the absolute opposite extreme.
Oh, yes. The pendulum swings completely to the other side.
And this is something we really need to address because this opposite extreme is incredibly prevalent today, and honestly, it's equally destructive.
Yes, you are referring to the false doctrine of absolute inaction. It has become quite a pervasive myth, especially in modern circles of thought.
It absolutely has. There's this rising trend, a sort of distorted philosophical movement promoting complete passivity. It's the idea that one can simply exist, perhaps burn some fragrant herbs, radiate a generally pleasant mood, and just wait for the universe to magically drop a fully materialized desire right into their lap.
The positive vibes only crowd.
Exactly. The exhausted striver learns that hard work isn't the sole answer, so they completely abandon the treadmill and decide to just lie on the floor, waiting for their muscles to grow on their own.
Which is a profound violation of the architecture of reality. We must firmly dismantle this myth right now. A lazy consciousness will inevitably, unavoidably, manifest a lazy reality.
A lazy reality, that's a great term.
The universe is not a cosmic vending machine that responds solely to idle wishes or fleeting positive moods. This passive approach demonstrates a severe lack of understanding regarding the equilibrium required for true reality generation.
Let me challenge that for a second, though. Because we all know of instances where individuals seem to possess a lazy consciousness, like they don't seem to strive or act with any grand intention, yet they enjoy immense inherited prosperity or incredible strokes of unearned fortune.
That's a very common observation.
Right. So if a lazy conscience creates a lazy reality, how do we explain them?
That is a vital distinction to make. We must separate the inheritance of a finalized effect from the active generation of a new reality.
Okay, unpack that.
An individual born into immense prosperity is inheriting a localized environment that is already saturated with the frequency of abundance. Their baseline resonance is attuned to that reality by default. It's the environment they know.
So they don't have to build it, they just occupy it.
Exactly. However, if they wish to consciously generate an entirely new reality, perhaps a thriving enterprise of their own creation, or a state of profound physical vitality that cannot be purchased, they must engage the precise same mechanics as anyone else.
Oh, I get it.
A passive disposition will never actively generate a new uninherited reality. It will simply maintain whatever baseline they are currently floating upon.
That clarifies it perfectly.
Yeah.
Okay, so if neither frantic action nor complete passivity is the answer, what does the balanced equilibrium actually look like?
True reality generation requires synchronized harmony across three distinct but deeply intertwined planes of existence: the mental plane, the spiritual plane, and the physical plane.
The triad.
They form a triad, yes. Each carries a crucial, undeniable weight. When you adopt the false doctrine of inaction, when you decide that physical action is entirely unnecessary and somehow beneath your elevated state of consciousness, you are negating a massive segment of your own existence.
You're basically crossing out a third of the equation.
Precisely. The organizing intelligence of this universe designed the physical plane as a vital, necessary arena for experience and ultimate materialization. Denying it, refusing to participate in it, is an act of extreme disrespect to the self and to the grand design.
It's like, let's modernize an old analogy here. Imagine a brilliant software architect. This programmer writes absolutely flawless code for a revolutionary new application.
Okay, I like where this is going.
The logic is pristine, the user interface is mapped out beautifully. The programmer holds this magnificent vision in their mind, possessing total clarity. The mental and spiritual planes are perfectly aligned, right? The concept is alive within them.
A beautiful, pristine conception.
But then, this same programmer absolutely refuses to compile the code. They refuse to upload it to a server or deploy it to a physical device.
They just sit there.
Yeah, they just stare at the lines of code on their local monitor, expecting the application to simply manifest on everyone's phones worldwide because the logic is so perfect. What happens?
Nothing happens.
Exactly. The application remains a ghost. It is a phantom, trapped in the realm of potential. The brilliant code does absolutely nothing for the world.
That is an exceptional way to visualize it. The physical plane, the hardware, the deployment must not be ignored. It must be utilized.
It's mandatory.
And this is the absolute crux of the matter, it must be utilized at the correct time in the sequence. The programmer doesn't start furiously pushing buttons on a keyboard blindly before the logic is structured.
Right, that would just be gibberish.
The physical action is the final crystallizing step of a much deeper, unseen process. When you cut off the physical aspect of your existence, claiming you only need thoughts and positive vibrations, the universe magnifies that ignorance.
And what's the result of that?
Intensified suffering. Because you become stagnant, bursting with immense potential that has absolutely no physical outlet for expression. It's incredibly frustrating.
So, we have the frantic striver smashing the keyboard wildly without a plan, producing nothing but error codes. And we have the passive dreamer staring at perfect code, refusing to hit the execution key.
Both are trapped. Both end up in a reality they do not desire.
What's truly fascinating here is that both archetypes are failing to recognize the actual hidden sequence of creating reality. They are completely blind to the supreme chain of events that dictates how the invisible becomes visible.
They're missing the connective tissue.
This is where we need to pivot and decode what that actual sequence is. And to do that, we have to point our attention inward. We have to examine the concept of intuition. But before we get there, we need to establish the groundwork of how our internal landscape affects the external world.
Right. To understand intuition properly, we must first grasp a fundamental principle, the relationship between the microcosm and the macrocosm.
The inner and outer worlds.
Exactly. You, as an individual consciousness, are an entire universe unto yourself.
I want to make sure the listener really internalizes this because, it sounds a bit poetic, but you're actually speaking about hard mechanics here. Can we get an ELI 5 on the microcosm and macrocosm?
Certainly. Think of a massive radio tower broadcasting an endless variety of signals. That is the macrocosm, the overarching potential of the universe.
Okay, massive radio tower. Got it.
Now think of these small radio receivers sitting on your kitchen counter. That is the microcosm. That's you.
I'm in the kitchen radio.
You are the radio. The tower is broadcasting everything simultaneously. Classical music, news reports, static, heavy metal, everything. But the reality playing in your kitchen is entirely dependent on the specific frequency your receiver is tuned to.
So while a vast constellation of humanity currently shares this one physical planet, we walk the same geographic streets, we breathe the same physical oxygen, every single person occupies an entirely distinct reality.
Exactly. The world you inhabit, the events you encounter, the opportunities you perceive, they are dictated completely and irrevocably by your internal frequency.
That is wild to think about.
There may be one physical Earth, but there are a multitude of distinct worlds layered upon it.
Give me an example of how that looks in daily life.
Well, two individuals can be standing side by side during an economic downturn. One experiences it as a devastating, terrifying tragedy, and the other sees it as a profound, exhilarating opportunity for growth and innovation.
They're physically in the exact same space.
Yes, but vibrationally, they are tuned to entirely different stations.
Because their internal resonance dictates the reality they perceive and interact with. And this brings us to how we navigate these internal worlds. It brings us to intuition.
Precisely. Intuition is the navigation.
I want to break down the word intuition itself. Because the common, everyday idea of intuition is just, a fleeting gut feeling. We treat it like a minor evolutionary survival mechanism. Yeah. Like, oh, I had a hunch I shouldn't eat that, or I had a feeling I should take a different route home. But if we separate the word into its structural components in intuition, a completely different, much more profound meaning emerges.
It reveals its true nature.
Right. In points to the inner world, the internal dimension. And tuition literally means teaching, instruction, or guidance.
Intuition is not a biological hunch. It is inner teaching.
Inner teaching.
It is direct guidance from the infinite wisdom that resides within your internal universe. It is the supreme navigational system of the mental and spiritual planes communicating directly with your localized waking consciousness.
So how does this inner teaching fit into the architecture of change? What is the actual flawless sequence of materialization that the exhausted striver is completely missing?
The sequence is an absolute cascade of energy, moving from the highest, most subtle realms down into the dense physical reality. It begins with the initial phase, right frequency.
Step 1, right frequency.
Your internal resonance must be an exact match for the reality you desire.
Tuning the radio dial to the exact station.
Yes. From the right frequency, the cascade flows downwards. The right frequency naturally and effortlessly leads to the right intuition.
Because you're on the right station, so the broadcast is clear.
Because your receiver is tuned correctly, you receive the correct inner teachings and guidance. The signal is pristine.
I am following. What happens next?
This right intuition then generates right compulsions.
Impulsions, like an urge.
A compulsion is that deep, undeniable, almost magnetic urge to do something. It is the internal command that says, go to this specific place, speak to this exact person, read this particular document, or even simply rest today.
It's the feeling that moves you without friction. It doesn't feel like grinding.
Correct. It feels like flow. And those right compulsions naturally lead to the subsequent movement, right action.
Ah, so there it is. Notice that physical action is finally appearing in this sequence, but it is near the very end.
It's the final domino. The action you take is guided, effortless, and perfectly aligned with the desired outcome. Finally, that right action, executed on the physical plane, materializes the right reality.
Okay, let me repeat that to make sure it's locked in. Right frequency, right intuition, right compulsion, right action, right reality.
It is a perfectly linear cascade.
It is the ultimate architecture of materialization. And this really reveals the fatal flaw of the masses, and certainly the tragedy of the exhausted striver we discussed at the very beginning. Most of humanity is running this entire sequence backward, or they're just, dropping right into the middle of it and hoping for the best.
We are deeply conditioned to start with action. We operate from a foundational frequency of lack, fear, or profound scarcity.
We look at our bank accounts or our health and just feel sheer panic.
Which is a very low frequency, and because the frequency is entirely mismatched to our grand desires, that low frequency generates the wrong inner guidance.
And that wrong guidance creates the wrong compulsions.
Which compel us toward frantic, exhausting, deeply misaligned physical actions. We push the immovable wall, we strike the glass like the trapped algorithm stuck in an endless loop.
Hitting the window over and over.
And those wrong actions ultimately, inevitably, lock us right back into the wrong reality. It is a self-perpetuating loop of absolute exhaustion.
Let's bring this down to earth and look at how this sequence plays out in the real world, returning to the struggles of that exhausted striver. Because there's a phenomenon we need to explore deeply here, the frequency ceiling, and exactly why we sabotage our own progress.
Sabotage is a fascinating mechanism.
It really is. Let's look at the parable of the vitality seeker. Imagine an individual who looks at their life and decides, with absolute fervor, to transform their physical health.
They want to change.
They're tired of feeling sluggish. They want boundless vitality. But they decide to achieve this transformation purely through grueling, relentless physical action.
Bypassing the frequency entirely.
Exactly. They commit to an endless tide of physical exertion every single day. They restrict their nourishment harshly. They are entirely focused on manipulating the mechanics of the physical plane.
They are trying to blow on the wind.
Because internally, their core frequency is still deeply anchored to an identity of lethargy, unworthiness, and exhaustion. They look in the mirror and still see a tired, failing person. The internal resonance has not shifted a single degree.
This is where the profound mechanics of psychological sabotage activate. Because the internal frequency is completely mismatched to the desired physical goal, it begins to generate terrible, counterproductive intuition. It becomes the voice of sabotage.
Let's walk through what that looks like. You wake up, you put on your shoes, you're ready to go endure your grueling physical routine. You look outside the window, and there is a single, solitary dark cloud in the sky.
a completely inconsequential change in the weather pattern.
Right. But because your foundational frequency is anchored in lethargy and struggle, that wrong frequency intercepts the visual data and generates a very convincing inner teaching.
The false intuition.
The inner voice whispers, "Look at the sky. It's ominous. It might rain. You might get sick. Stay inside. Rest. You've worked hard enough this week. The environment is against you today."
And suddenly the compulsion is not to move, but to stagnate. The truth is, no amount of physical exertion can ever permanently outpace your fundamental frequency. Your frequency will always eventually pull your physical reality back to its baseline.
Always.
Always. It is like stretching a heavy industrial rubber band. You can apply immense physical force to stretch it far beyond its resting state, but the moment your attention wavers, the moment your muscles fatigue, the fundamental tension snaps it right back to its original shape.
That makes so much sense. Let's look at another example of this, perhaps one even more common in the professional sphere. The parable of the stagnant enterprise.
I see this constantly.
Imagine an entrepreneur or an artist or a creator of any kind. They've been laboring on their vision for a passage of eras. They're relentless. They unleash an endless tide of marketing campaigns, continuous networking, and ceaseless labor.
The pure grind.
They barely sleep. They are executing every known physical action in their industry's playbook. Yet, they remain trapped under a rigid ceiling of prosperity. Their harvest never grows beyond a certain incredibly frustrating limit.
Yes. They are drowning in the illusion that if they just add one more physical strategy, one more marketing channel, one more networking event, they will finally shatter the ceiling. But the ceiling is not constructed of physical barriers. It's constructed entirely of frequency.
If we apply the cascade sequence to them, where is the exact breakdown?
The breakdown occurs at the absolute origin point. Their foundational frequency was permanently set to a mere fragment of their grand desire.
So they wanted massive abundance, but were broadcasting a tiny signal.
In their mind, deeply rooted in their emotional resonance, they only truly recognized themselves as being capable of that limited harvest. Perhaps they carried a hidden belief that massive success leads to corruption, or that they are fundamentally unworthy of a sweeping harvest.
So the inner hardware was limited.
Exactly. Because the universe operates on flawless, lawful mechanics, even if they worked an infinite magnitude of hours, the harvest would forcefully reflect the exact limitation of their internal frequency.
It's like writing a brilliant piece of software designed to process massive amounts of data, but installing it on a computer from the distant past with an incredibly limited processor.
A perfect analogy.
The software is trying to run, the physical action is happening, but the underlying hardware, the frequency, completely caps the output.
You cannot install the programming of scarcity and demand an output of massive abundance, no matter how relentlessly you type on the keyboard. The physical action is completely irrelevant if the foundational operating system is wrong.
This is where we need to get incredibly practical, because the listener is probably asking, okay, let's look at what happens when this entrepreneur finally realizes the trap. What happens when they stop running the materialization sequence backwards?
This is where the real work begins.
What do they actually do differently on, say, a Tuesday morning to change their frequency? Because they can't just wish it away, right?
Yeah. No, wishing is passive. This requires a profound transformation, a complete reversal of perspective, consciously reordering the planes of existence. The moment this individual stops the frantic physical action and focuses entirely on shifting their internal frequency to perfectly match their ultimate goal, the mechanics change.
Walk me through that Tuesday morning.
Previously, they would wake up, immediately grab their physical device, and look at their inbox with a feeling of dread and pressure.
Ugh, yes, the panic scroll.
That is a frequency of lack. The new approach requires auditing that internal dialogue before a single physical action is taken. They wake up, they do not touch the device, they sit and actively cultivate the absolute knowing of a massive harvest.
They intentionally set the dial.
They focus on cognitive framing. They shift their emotional baseline to relief, gratitude, and undeniable certainty. They tune the receiver.
They're essentially reprogramming the neurological filter, what science might call the reticular activating system, so their brain starts hunting for completely different opportunities.
Precisely. And when that frequency shifts, the new elevated frequency generates brilliant new intuition. The inner teaching changes.
So the ideas themselves become better.
Suddenly, instead of feeling the compulsion to blast out a generic, desperate marketing email to 1,000 contacts, they receive an unexpected, entirely novel idea. A specific name drops into their consciousness.
Wow.
This creates a powerful, joyous compulsion to take a highly leveraged action, perhaps reaching out to one specific strategic partner they had previously felt too intimidated to contact.
And because the action is born from the right frequency, it is effortless.
It is entirely effortless, and that single, aligned action materializes a vast harvest in a mere fragment of the time it previously took to achieve absolutely nothing. The struggle dissolves because the mental, spiritual, and physical planes are finally synchronized.
This brings us to a massive, monumental threshold in our discussion. If frequency is the foundational cause of all reality, the absolute seed of every harvest, how does one actually lock into the supreme frequency of their desired state?
This is the ultimate question.
How do we permanently change the station on the cosmic radio and ensure the dial doesn't just slip back?
This introduces the final and perhaps most vital concept, the alchemy of knowing versus believing. And this distinction is perhaps the most misunderstood concept in the entire realm of reality creation and personal potential.
I want to explore this deeply because I'm going to introduce a concept here that might challenge a lot of common advice. We are constantly told, you just have to believe in yourself, believe in your goals, believe it will happen.
It's the standard advice.
But our discussion suggests that simply believing is completely insufficient. In fact, relying on belief might actually be a trap.
It is a profound and subtle trap.
Let's dissect the psychology of belief. When you really analyze the word belief, it intrinsically implies a shadow of doubt.
Yes, it leaves room for failure.
If I say to you, I believe my business will succeed, it carries this tiny hidden caveat. It implies that I am hoping it might be true, despite a lack of absolute evidence. Belief is a fragile, aspirational state.
It requires constant maintenance.
It's easily shaken by a single dark cloud in the sky, or a single critical comment from a peer.
What is truly fascinating here is the esoteric, true meaning of faith, which modern society has mistakenly conflated with mere belief.
What's the difference?
True, functional faith is not wishing. It is not hoping against the odds. It is rooted in absolute, unshakable confidence and unwavering conviction. It is the state of absolute knowing.
Yes, knowing. There is a weight, a density to that word.
Think about the fundamental laws of your everyday existence, like the concept of gravity. You do not wake up every morning, stand at the edge of your bed and say to yourself, I fiercely believe that when I step forward, I will not float away into the atmosphere.
No, you'd sound crazy.
You do not recite positive affirmations about gravity to bolster your confidence in it. You simply know it.
It's an absolute, unquestioned reality in my internal framework.
Exactly. You know that if you hold a familiar physical object in your hand and release your grip, it will fall to the floor. There is zero emotional struggle regarding this outcome. There is zero doubt. It is a finalized fact of your existence.
So permanently changing your frequency requires elevating your desire from a fragile, hopeful belief to an absolute, unshakable knowing. That is a massive psychological leap.
What is the defining leap?
It's the difference between hoping it doesn't rain and knowing the sun is already shining above the cloud cover. So how do we cultivate that state? What is the actual recipe for generating that kind of profound gravity-level conviction?
Cultivating the state of absolute knowing requires a total synchronized alignment of three elements within your internal universe: your attention, your identity, and most profoundly, your emotionally charged thoughts.
Okay, I need another ELI 5 here.
Yeah.
Attention is where you direct your focus. Identity is who you fundamentally claim to be at your core. But emotionally charged thoughts, this seems to be the linchpin of the entire operation. Why are emotions so critical to this process?
Because emotion is the vital mechanism of density. We have to understand how a thought transitions from an invisible concept into a tangible reality.
Okay, lay it out for me.
A thought, on its own, drifting through the mental plane without any emotional intensity, is completely hollow. It lacks the gravitational pull required to drag physical reality toward it. You can think a specific thought a vast multitude of times, but if you feel absolutely nothing while thinking it, nothing materializes.
So staring into a mirror and reciting empty phrases or affirmations about prosperity while feeling completely numb or terrified inside does absolutely nothing.
It is akin to whispering instructions to a stone. Emotion is the catalyst. Emotion alters the vibratory weight of the mental thought.
Stop right there. Vibratory rate. Let's translate that into modern understandable terms. What do you mean by altering the vibratory rate?
Let's use a network routing analogy. Imagine your brain is sending data packets out into the network of reality. A thought without emotion is like a tiny, empty ping.
There's a little blip.
It registers on the network, but it carries no data payload. It is ignored by the servers. But an emotion, whether it is profound joy, deep gratitude, intense passion, or even unshakable certainty, is like attaching a massive high-priority data payload to that ping.
He gives it weight.
The emotion gives the thought mass. It gives it priority. When a thought is saturated with intense, unwavering emotion, the signal becomes dense enough, heavy enough, to cross the threshold from the invisible mental plane down into the dense physical realm.
I absolutely love this imagery of density and mass. It perfectly illustrates why some intentions manifest and others just sort of fade away.
Yeah.
It makes me think of the process of metallurgy, like attempting to shape a piece of heavy, cold metal.
That's a very apt visual.
Imagine a blacksmith working at an anvil. A thought on its own is merely the physical hammer. It's a tool of intention. You have a very clear intention. You can swing that mental hammer with all your cognitive might. But if you try to strike cold steel with a hammer, what happens?
The hammer simply bounces off. It jars the blacksmith's hand, expends a tremendous amount of physical energy, and leaves absolutely no mark on the steel.
Exactly. The physical reality, the cold steel, remains completely unchanged despite the immense effort. This is the exhausted striver in a nutshell.
Striking cold steel over and over.
But emotional intensity, the profound feeling of knowing that, is the fire. That is the blazing forge. When you plunge the cold steel of your current physical reality into the roaring fire of intense, aligned emotion, the metal begins to glow.
It's often.
It becomes malleable. Suddenly, that exact same hammer of intention, your focused thought, can effortlessly bend and shape the reality into a masterpiece with a single, gentle tap. Without the heat, without the intense, unwavering emotional knowing, the hammer is completely useless against the stubborn density of the physical world.
That analogy perfectly encapsulates the synchronization of the triad we discussed earlier. The cold metal represents the physical plane, the hammer represents the mental plane, the logic, the blueprint.
The fire.
The fire represents the spiritual plane, the emotional resonance, the absolute knowing. Only when all three interact in perfect harmony can the shape of reality be permanently and effortlessly altered. When you know a reality is yours, you feel the emotion of its completion before the physical evidence arrives.
You generate the heat before you strike the anvil.
Exactly. That is the alchemy that locks in the supreme frequency.
Man, we have covered a monumental amount of ground today. I want to bring this grand philosophical sequence back down to the immediate lived experience of the listener. You, listening right now, wherever you are, think back to the exhaustive struggles we discussed at the very beginning.
The endless treadmill.
The feeling of fighting the tide.
It is time for a broader reflection on the ultimate potential of the human experience. For a vast passage of history, humanity has operated primarily from a place of defense and reaction.
Just trying to survive.
We treat ourselves as mere pawns on a massive universal chessboard, constantly reacting to the moves of an invisible opponent, scrambling to survive the immediate localized physical circumstances.
Like the algorithm trapped in the loop or the winged creature at the window.
Right.
We just react to the glass.
Yes. But when you finally stop reacting, when you cease to be the chess piece and consciously assume the frequency of the grand architect, the entire paradigm shifts fundamentally.
The game changes completely.
Reality entirely ceases to be a battlefield of resistance, exhaustion, and struggle. It becomes a boundless, highly responsive canvas. True, absolute control over your reality is not about forceful dominance over the physical world.
It's not about grinding.
It is never about screaming at the wind or striking the glass. It is entirely about effortless, synchronized internal alignment.
It is about changing the internal station until the music of your life sounds exactly the way you want it to, and letting your physical actions dance to that new rhythm. So, let's summarize the absolute core of this journey, this sequence we have traversed today.
It's vital to remember the order.
We must fundamentally stop exhausting ourselves by fighting the finalized effects of the physical realm. The physical world is merely a mirror reflecting our internal state. It's not an enemy to be conquered.
It is a reflection.
We must synchronize our existence, the mental blueprint, the spiritual emotional fire, and the physical deployment by letting our supreme inner resonance, our true internal teaching, guide our hands. Physical action is the final stroke of the brush on the canvas, not the paint itself.
The materialization cascade is absolute. The right frequency, cultivated through absolute knowing and emotional density, dictates the right intuition.
Right intuition.
The right intuition commands the right compulsion. The right compulsion inspires the right action. And the right action, effortlessly applied at the perfect moment, Manifest the right reality. That is the unbreakable architecture of change.
I want to leave you, the listener, with a final seed to ponder as you step back into the flow of your day. Consider the greatest obstacle you are currently facing.
The thing causing the most resistance?
Think of that specific area of your life where you are fighting against the tide with all your physical might, feeling utterly exhausted by the lack of progress. What if that immovable wall, that incredibly frustrating barrier, is not an enemy sent to destroy you?
What if it's not a punishment?
What if it's not a sign of your inadequacy or a brutal test of your physical endurance? What if that wall is simply a perfectly faithful, unwavering reflection of your current internal frequency, patiently waiting for you to simply stop pushing and change the station?